About 15 years old with his father, and they wanted him to start helping with our living history program, which he did. And he also attended our heritage school in the summer. And then Robert found a unit to go join. So he joined a Confederate reenacting unit. Of course, even though you're a Confederate unit, you usually have another set of clothes, and you go both ways. So Robert joined us, and then from there he started to volunteer at Pea Ridge National Park, and he does impressions up there. I think he even works on a cannon crew up there. He's in the infantry. He's just an all-around living historian now. So I'm going to hand it over to Robert to tell you about the Battle of Fayetteville.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to first say thank you all for coming here today as we honor the men who bore the ultimate sacrifice upon the very ground that you sit upon. My name, for those of you who don't know, is Elizur B. Harrison. And it wasn't too long ago that I was here as a young lieutenant in the 1st Arkansas Union Cavalry. This gallant regiment, the story I'm about to tell you, faced some of the most ultimate challenges in its service to the United States. I shall start at the very beginning in 1860. As we all know, in 1860, our president, Abraham Lincoln, was elected to office. Many Southerners took exception to this and feared that President Lincoln would make policies that would threaten their economy and their culture and way of life. And so therefore, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and of course, South Carolina formed a new confederacy and seceded from the United States. Arkansas, in January of 1861, met in Little Rock for a convention to determine their future Union ties. Thankfully, in January of 1861, Arkansas voted to remain the Union, and for a while, it seemed that would be the case for the entire war. However, events changed it. On April 12th of 1861, South Carolina forces fired upon the federal garrison of Fort Sumter. This prompted President Lincoln to call for all patriots of the United States to volunteer to suppress the rebellion that threatened the Union of which their ancestors had strived to create. Many other southern states were uncomfortable with this idea, to say the least. They did not wish to send their sons into the South, who had such a similar culture and economy to their own. And so, 5 more states joined the Confederacy. Arkansas, sadly, was among them. However, not all in Arkansas agreed with the new policy of the Confederate government, particularly in the Northwest Arkansas region of which we now reside. For in the Northwest Arkansas region was not a planter class, but rather hard-scrabble farmers who lived day to day, ration to ration, without slaves. Now, I must tell you of my brother, as his story is very much entwined with that of the brave 1st Arkansas. My brother at the beginning of the war was a captain in the 36th Illinois Infantry Regiment and served under Curtis at the Battle of Pea Ridge. He marched through this very region. Upon returning to Missouri, he found around cities such as Springfield camps of various refugees from this very region. Due to their pro-Union sympathies, many of these refugees have been driven from their homes by the pro-Confederate factions. Even Isaac Murphy, the one representative in the 2nd Convention to decide secession, who voted against secession, was forced to leave his home in fear for his life and that of his families. These refugees, my brother saw, were enlisting in the various regiments raised in the states surrounding Arkansas, such as Missouri, Iowa, Indiana, and Illinois. However, they were fighting for other states under other state flags, not their own. My brother saw that the loyal Arkansas men should in fact have their own regiment, their own flag to fight under for the cause of the Union. Many of our senior commanders, however, had their doubts, which were not entirely unfounded. There was the great possibility that these Arkansans would end up fighting their neighbors, their friends, men that they had grown up with since the beginning. But luckily for my brother, he succeeded, and in the midsummer of 1862, the 1st Arkansas Union Cavalry was established. It mustered in at Springfield, Missouri, and so quickly were the ranks filled that the commanders decided that another regiment should be raised, the 1st Arkansas Infantry. And even then, there were so many more that another unit was raised, the 1st Arkansas Light Artillery. These two units will again be mixed in with the story of my regiment, the 1st Arkansas Cavalry. But first, I will tell you about our regiment, as the beginning of our story is not entirely bright. For in December of 1862, after having successfully driven the pro-Confederate forces from Missouri and securing the border state for the cause of the United States, the next assignment for what was known as the Army of the Frontier was to rid the northwest region of Arkansas from Confederate forces. These were under the command of Thomas C. Hindman. My brother and I, and our gallant regiment, were part of that army under James Blunt, and we marched to meet against Thomas Hindman at Prairie Grove, not too far away from here. It was at Prairie Grove that we received our first distinct black mark. For on that day, ahead of us was another regiment, a Missouri regiment. They were beset upon by the enemy and were unprepared to receive an attack, and so therefore broke. They retreated through our ranks, and our men, having only just been in combat that day and never before, were sadly caught up in the panic and broke as well. My brother was ashamed. He was especially worried that it would end what many people called his experiment. One of our commanders, Francis Herron, called the scene disgraceful, that we had dishonored our flag and our country. We would, however, get our next chance. For after the Battle of Prairie Grove, the next assignment for our regiment was that of policemen. After those battles, the Confederates all but abandoned this state to what they called partisans, or irregulars, bushwhackers, marauders, who roamed the countryside and terrorized and murdered and looted the loyal citizens. Our job, as we were posted to this very city, was to patrol this area and protect the good, loyal citizens from these marauders. This posting, however, took a great toll upon our regiment. As before, 2 campaigns had already been fought through this area. There was very little left in terms of forage and supplies. I will let my own brother's words describe the state of our unit, as well as the 2 other Arkansas regiments, the 1st Arkansas Infantry and 1st Arkansas Artillery, that were stationed here with us. The state of my command, the 1st Arkansas Cavalry, numbers an aggregate of 1,032 men. Probably when all are at the post, they may number 850 effective men. They have 154 serviceable horses and 65 hunters, all told. The regiment has not received any clothing for 3 months, and only a very small supply since November, and so that a large part of the men are in a destitute condition. The 1st Arkansas Infantry will number in a few days an aggregate of 830 men, probably 700 of them effective. They are totally without transportation, clothing or tents, or equipments of any kind, except the arms picked up on the Prairie Grove battleground, which are of all patterns and calibers. The destitution of clothing is very great, and much suffering and sickness prevails on account of it. Besides, it would be ruinous policy to place this undrilled, barefooted butternut regiment in the field to be mixed up and cut in pieces by rebels in the same dress. The 1st Arkansas Light Artillery numbers 110 men who are destitute of clothing and have never received their guns. Of course, nothing can be expected. We were in a sorry state. There was no forage for our horses. We were in a sense alone out here at this post. And what was worse, the rebels knew it. And a force under the command of William K. Bell had made a decision to take this post from us to wrestle control of this region back to the Confederacy. We were expecting this attack and prepared for it. My brother was confident that should the time come, our men would prove themselves worthy of standing beneath stars and stripes. However, the attack was not what we expected on that of April 18th. For 5:40 a.m. on April 18th, we heard the sounds of gunshots coming east of town. Our forward pickets that we had placed on the road leading from that direction had been overwhelmed by enemy. Almost all of them had been killed, one of whom was captured and was later hanged as a spy. However, their sacrifice was not in vain. For discharging their weapons, they had alerted the camp. I myself was residing in a house that lay across the street, the Baxter house. And upon hearing the noise, I awoke. And going out the back door of my room, I looked across the field and saw, to my great concern, the line of the enemy advancing towards us at a full gallop. Needless to say, I retreated into my room and hastily dressed, grabbed my arms, made my way out the front door to this house, our headquarters. There, I found my brother, already alert, with his saber and revolver, and was making his way towards our camps. When we arrived there, our men were already getting into formation, grabbing arms and accoutrements, and prepared for the fight. We were at a disadvantage, however. For as I said before, the 1st Arkansas Infantry had no uniforms. We could not tell them from the enemy. And so our brother made the decision that they were to remain behind in camp as a reserve. Only 2 companies came up online. The 1st Arkansas Artillery had no cannons. So what did they do? They stayed in camp. So that left only our regiment, the 1st Arkansas Cavalry, online. The line stretched across this lawn, off in that direction to the right and off to the left. On the left was Lieutenant Colonel Bishop. On the right, Major Ezra Fitch. And here in the center, on this very spot, was my brother. At about 6 a.m., the first attack came from the Confederates. They charged across the open fields towards us. But luckily for us, our men were armed with superior weaponry. We later found amongst the Confederate dead a variety of shotguns, Arkadelphia rifles, squirrel rifles that had ineffective range, which was a blessing for us, seeing as they were outnumbered. We drove this attack back. Our men stood their ground. But suddenly, at 6:30 a.m., not too long after that, we heard the boom, boom of artillery. It was coming from East Mountain. The rebels had 2 cannons up on a mountain and were firing shells down on our position, one of which entered the Baxter house through the roof, into the floor, and into the basement, where the family was hiding. Luckily for them, the shell landed in a container of lard, and therefore extinguishing the shell. Providence prevailed and protected them. This artillery fire was obviously concerning to our men and had a massive psychological effect. We had no guns of our own. My brother sensed this and walked up and down the lines, shouting encouragement to the men and singing patriotic tunes such as "Rally Around the Flag, Boys," "Battle Cry of Freedom." They stood their ground. The next attack came shortly after that. This one dismounted, again across the same field as the first. And once again, we drove them back. This was, however, the heaviest fighting of the battle. The enemy came within just yards of our position, our men firing from rifle pits, windows, and any cover they could find. The casualties were highest at this point. My brother then, at one point, ordered 2 companies from our regiment up towards East Mountain with the orders to deal with 2 guns. And they were successful. Shortly thereafter, the guns were silenced and they were withdrawn. It was around 9 a.m. that the final gallant attack came upon us. I have no shame in calling it gallant. Their commander, Colonel Monroe, was admired by all of us for his bravery and his men's bravery. They came charging down Old Missouri Road, as you know it today, Dixon Street. They charged on horseback, and they were met with fire from our line here and enfiladining fire from their front. The corpses of horses and men were piled in heaps before us. Shortly thereafter, they withdrew, and then they retreated altogether from the city. Our men had held their ground. The battle had lasted for over 3 hours, not 4 hours, and we had held off the attack. We stood proud on that field that we had shed our blood for the cause of our country. I wish to read to you a proclamation by our post adjutant, who I feel best summed up the victory and the aftermath in his own words. For though we were exulted in our victory, it was also a solemn affair in the aftermath. General Order Number 16, Headquarters Post, Fayetteville, Arkansas, April 19, 1863. Comrades in arms, let April 18, 1863 be ever remembered. The Battle of Fayetteville has been fought and won. Today, the brave and victorious sons of Arkansas stand proudly upon the soil which their blood and their bravery had rendered sacred to every true-hearted American, but double sacred to them. In the light of this holy Sabbath sun, we are permitted, through God's mercy, to gather together in His name and in the name of our common country to offer up our heartfelt thanks to the giver of every good and perfect gift, for the triumphs of our arms and for the blessing which we this day enjoy. When yesterday's sun rose upon us, the hostile hordes of a bitter and unprincipled foe were pouring their deadly fire among our ranks. The booming of his artillery was re-echoing from mountain to mountain, and the clattering hooves of his cavalry were trampling in our streets. At Meridian, General Cabell, with his shattered and panic-stricken cohorts, was retreating precipitately through the passes of the Boston Mountains towards the Arkansas River, leaving his dead and wounded in our hands. Fellow soldiers, it is to your honor and credit I say it. He could not have left them in better hands. Not one act of barbarity or even unkindness stains the laurels you so proudly wear. Such may your conduct ever be brave and unflinching in battle, kind and generous to the vanquished. Abstain from all cruelty and excess. Respect the immunities of private property. Never insult or injure women or children, the aged, the sick, or a fallen foe. Let us show to our enemies that the federal soldiers of Arkansas are as generous as they are brave and patriotic. Let us prove to them that the justice of our cause, the purity of our purpose, so that soon we may gather together under the broad folds of our time-honored and victorious banner every true-hearted son of Arkansas. Fellow soldiers, I congratulate you all upon the glorious victory you have won. By your cool and determined bravery, for that union which our revolutionary sires established by their valor and sealed with their blood. More than all, I do congratulate you that this battle was fought upon Arkansas soil, and this victory was won by Arkansans alone, thereby testifying to our patriotic brethren in arms from other states that we are not only willing, but anxious to second their efforts in rescuing our state from the dominion of traitors, but in all our rejoicing. Let us not neglect to shed a tear of regret over the graves of those heroic men who fell beside us, fighting bravely for the nation's honor. Green be their mossy graves, immortal be their name. Above their banner proudly waves, while heaven records their fame. A just cause is ours. The stars and stripes float gallantly over us. God is on our side. Who can be against us? By order of Colonel M. LaRue Harrison, commanding post, James Roseman, Lieutenant, Post Adjutant. Lieutenant Roseman was right. It was a time not to neglect our fallen comrades. Of both sides. Yes. I shall first list casualties that were listed in our gallant regiment. Reuben Burrows, Private. Jonas Riddle, Private. William Burrow, First Sergeant. Lucian Amos, Private. George Davis, Private. James Bell, Private. Joshua Stewart, Private. Shadrach Cockrell, Private. James Shockley, Private. Let us not also forget those on the other side who fell with their own cause. William Hamilton, Private. M.F. Harkness, Private. Claiborne Hill, Private. Brandon, Private. A.P. Woods, First Sergeant. J.O. Lively, Private. James Hubbard, Private. Parsons, 12th Texas Cavalry, the only man killed. H.J. Jones, Private. James Rowe, Private. William Touchstone, Private. G.H. Childress, Private. A.W. Lawrence, Private. James Davis. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let us take a pause as we respect those that fell upon this field today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In conclusion, of course, war never ends with a battle's over, at least not yet. For 2 more years of war followed, 2 more years of service for the 1st Arkansas. They continued to defend the landscape around you. They gave their lives for their country. And upon the end of the war, they returned home. To their farms, to their shops, to their families, to their children, to their wives, to their friends. My brother himself made Arkansas his second home. In fact, he became mayor of this fair city. However, post-war politics quickly turned sour on him, and he was forced to return to Washington, D.C. I myself, Elizur B. Harrison, also returned to Fayetteville. I went into business. I went to banking. I married a woman, became my wife for the rest of my life. Sally Yater, who was sheltered in the house across the street, in the basement where the shell landed in the tub of lard, with Providence spared. She was my companion for the rest of my days. Before closing, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you all for coming here, because for so many years after the battle, I have been the only voice for my comrades. They have, in essence, long been forgotten. The ground has quite changed since then. So that I hope today, by coming here and listening to my words, you will remember those of the 1st Arkansas who bled their blood upon this ground and gave the ultimate sacrifice for their beloved country, for their comrades, for their state. I want to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed hearing from Elizur B. Harrison, also known as Robert